apologise to all the people who believe in the BBC and care for it and wish it to survive and thrive. I'd like to apologise to the licence fee payer who funds the BBC to deliver its mission. And I'd like to apologise to the thousands of people who work for the BBC on staff, but it wasn't sufficient because the fundamental issue here was the sequencing of the edit and the placing of the Proud Boys march. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for.
Along that line, but what I'm trying to get to, there's been a lot of speculation in the media that it was the inaction and the delay by the BBC board, and it's reported in the press as that there was a dispute in the BBC board.
The report was in some way leaked to the public, and the Telegraph. Do you mean that particular?
I mean, as soon as the Telegraph started publishing this memo and its coverage of it, there was just a vacuum in the BBC for nearly a week. Order, order. We're back for our second panel, and we have Dr. Samir Shah, the Chair of the BBC and Chair of the BBC Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. We have Sir Robbie Gibb, the Non-Executive Director of the BBC and member of the BBC Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee, and Caroline Thompson, a Non-Executive Director of the BBC and also member of the BBC Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. Thank you to all of us for appearing before us today. You have probably seen the first panel, so I won't repeat my introduction to the session today, but suffice to say, Dr. Shah, you're once again in front of us at a point where the BBC is said to be in crisis and where the board appears to be in crisis too. Now, you'll probably recall when this committee first met you, we were a little bit frustrated that you seemed unable to take a definitive stance on anything, and we wanted you to give us strong, unequivocal answers. So I want us to make sure that we start off on the right foot today. Did the BBC block the head of news from apologising for the Panorama programme before the 10th of November?
I will directly answer that question, but if you may forgive me, I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to apologise to all the people who believe in the BBC and care for it and wish it to survive and thrive. I'd like to apologise to the licence fee payer who funds the BBC to deliver its mission. And I'd like to apologise to the thousands of people who work for the BBC, our staff, who work with such dedication and commitment to deliver the output we all enjoy so much. I regret the mistakes that have been made and the impact that has had. Let me now come to the question that you asked. Just, if I may ask you, just repeat it for me so I can answer it directly.
Did you block the head? Did you and the rest of the BBC board block the head of news from apologising for the Panorama programme on the 10th of November?
You go back to the week in which the story broke in the Telegraph, and you wrote to me, and I was writing the answer to you. I heard that the news wanted to apologise for the splicing of the edit with a white spark. I thought that was a necessary thing to do, but it wasn't sufficient because the fundamental issue here was the sequencing of the edit and the placing of the Proud Boys march. I think the real issue here was the impression left that the President Trump in his 6th of January speech had called to violent action, and what we had to apologise for was that, as well as the splicing of the edit. It's my view that editing interviews is a normal journalistic practice. So that in itself is not what the problem was. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for. So the answer to your question is, I didn't think it was adequate. I thought it was necessary but not sufficient.
If you felt that that was the case, then why was there no apology when David Grossman first brought that to your attention?
You mean in the EJSC meetings in January and May? Mm. I think that's a very fair question, and I'm looking back, I think we should have made the decision earlier, I think in May, as it happens. In January, you've heard earlier that the report came about, which was about, the context was how well, as we do, constantly review our own coverage, how we did, what went well, what didn't go well, and we examined how we covered the US elections as a general point. And the report came back, as you've said, that coverage was on the whole excellent, but there were some real issues there. We're invited, and there was at that meeting also coverage of the Arabic service, which we may come back to. I invited, which is normal, for news to give me a formal response to that research. That response came in May. When that response came, one thing I'd like to make clear is that this was a constructive discussion that took place at the EGSC. Some very important observations were made in that report, which the executives took on. For me, one of the most interesting ones was the recognition about the story selection idea, and I have a letter in front of me, the news report, you've got it, which said the BBC infrastructure is heavily resourced in the democratic areas, and we need to move into other parts of the US to get a better sense of opinion within it. And that is an action that's going to be taken, and there's going to be movement of which our resources tap into not just the democratic heartlands where we have got, in a way, over too many resources that we need to move it out. I give that example simply to tell you all that this wasn't a discussion where you had a defensive news response to some very serious issues. So that was it. When it came to the Panorama edit, there was a difference of opinion across the board. And looking back, I think it would have been better for us to pursue it then. I completely accept that. And as we go into my own understanding of how we got here, it seems to me, along with the editorial and the governance, which are important issues which we'll unpack, I think there is an issue about how quickly we respond, the speed of our response. Why do we not do it quickly enough? Why do we take so much time? And this was another illustration of that. We should have, as a collective, we should have pursued it to the end and got to the bottom of it and not wait, as we did, till it became public discourse. I mean, I have a lot of things to say about my relationship with Mr. Prescott and that report and what he did.
We've got lots of questions to come on to along that line. But what I'm trying to get to, there's been a lot of speculation in the media that it was the inaction and the delay by the BBC board, and it's reported in the press as that there was a dispute in the BBC board that has caused so much of the dramas ever since. I'm just really interested to know why it took so long. Why didn't you get on the front foot? If you'd have got on the front foot and, either with an apology or with a robust defence, either I think, would have been an acceptable way of responding to this. But it's that huge delay. So, I mean, why? What was causing the delay? What were your reasons for delaying?
It seems to me there are two types of timeline. One is one that began with the EGSC report in January.
I'm talking about when the
and then there's a
report.
week after the report was in some way leaked to the public and the Telegraph. Do you mean that particular?
I mean, as soon as the Telegraph started publishing this memo and its coverage of it, there was just a vacuum in the BBC for nearly a week, where there was no comment given in any meaningful way to the substance of it. Why didn't you get on the front foot with either an apology or some kind of defence of what had happened?
But precisely for the question you've just raised, I needed to understand what went wrong and to get the right answer. Getting the right answer was really important.
You knew what went wrong because you'd already had the Grossman report into this and your own.
When we went in that week, I asked the Director General to review, because I said we reflected on it, to review the clip and whether there were any serious editorial breaches. There were, as an outcome of that, and that was the research that had to be done to get it right. It took time to get it right. We knew what the actual apology was for. I said it wasn't just about the splicing, the editing, it was about the impression, and that had to be done properly and investigated thoroughly. As well as that, I was writing a response to you from the board. I have 13 board members, and I needed to make sure that they were aware about what I was writing, and I had their support. I admit, that did take time, and of course it would always be better to be able to get out quickly, but it's as important for me to get it right, to get it supported by the board.
If the BBC had responded quicker, do you think that the resignations might not have happened?
That's a hypothetical I can't answer. All I will say is that I think the resignation of the CEO of News was a very honourable act. I think it was right of her to take responsibility for an error in her division. As she herself said, the buck stops with me. And I said, in public life, it's rare to find people who accept that something went wrong in their own division and accept responsibility and take responsibility, and I applaud her for that.